Stand in the Egyptian desert today, and you'll see tourists posing for selfies in front of structures that were already ancient when Jesus was born. The Great Pyramid was 2,500 years old by the time Cleopatra saw it. Think about that. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the iPhone than to the building of the pyramids. Egypt's story stretches so far back that it almost breaks your sense of time. 3,000 years of continuous civilization along one river, in one strip of green cutting through an ocean of sand. 30 dynasties of pharaohs. Monuments so vast that people once believed only gods could have built them. For centuries, we could only imagine what ancient Egypt actually looked like. Faded tomb paintings, fragments of papyrus, crumbling statues missing their noses. But now, using AI trained on archaeological evidence, historical records, and the latest Egyptology research, we can rebuild those lost worlds. See the temples when their paint was still bright. Walk the streets when the markets were full. This is the entire history of ancient Egypt, from the first farmers on the Nile to the fall of the last pharaoh. 5,000 years in 20 minutes. It all starts with the river. Around 7,000 BC, the Sahara isn't a desert yet. It's green savanna, dotted with lakes. People hunt, fish, and herd cattle across what's now empty sand. But the climate is shifting. Slowly, century by century, the rains stop. The lakes dry up. The grasslands turn to dust. And everyone moves toward the one source of water that never fails, the Nile. By about 5000 BC, communities are forming along the riverbanks. They're growing emmer wheat and barley. They're raising cattle and sheep. They've figured out something extraordinary. Every year, without fail, the Nile floods. And when the waters retreat, they leave behind a strip of rich black soil, perfect for growing crops. The Egyptians call their country Kemet, the Black Land. The desert on either side is Deshret, the Red Land. That contrast defines everything, a narrow ribbon of life surrounded by death. Two distinct cultures emerge. In the marshy delta where the Nile fans out into the Mediterranean, you get Lower Egypt. Further south, along the narrow valley, Upper Egypt. They develop separately for centuries. Different customs, different gods, different crowns. The red crown in the north, the white crown in the south. Then, around 3100 BC, a king from Upper Egypt conquers the north and unites the two lands. The ancient sources call him Narmer, sometimes Menes. He wears both crowns combined into one, the double crown. He builds a new capital at Memphis, right where Upper and Lower Egypt meet. And just like that, one of the longest-running civilizations in human history begins. The Old Kingdom begins around 2686 BC, and this is when Egypt goes from impressive to mind-bending. The early pharaohs are buried in flat, rectangular tombs called mastabas. Decent enough. But then a man named Imhotep has an idea. He's the architect for Pharaoh Djoser, and instead of one mastaba, he stacks 6 on top of each other, each one smaller than the last. The Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It's the first monumental stone building in human history. Nothing like it exists anywhere else on Earth. But the Egyptians aren't finished. Within a century, they've figured out how to make the sides smooth. At Dashur, Pharaoh Sneferu builds the bent pyramid. Halfway up, the angle changes because the engineers realize it's too steep. They adjust. The next attempt, the red pyramid, is perfect. Smooth sides, true geometry. Then comes Sneferu's son, Khufu, and he builds the one everyone knows, the Great Pyramid of Giza. 2.3 million blocks of limestone, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh 80 tons, transported 800 kilometers from Aswan. The base is level to within 2 centimeters across 230 meters. It's 146 meters tall. For 3,800 years, it's the tallest structure on Earth. How did they do it? Not slaves. Recent archaeological evidence shows the workers were skilled laborers, well-fed, housed in a purpose-built village nearby. They ate beef, which was expensive. They received medical care. Thousands of workers rotating in shifts, organized with extraordinary precision. The pharaohs of this era are living gods. They command absolute authority. The entire economy revolves around the Nile flood and the pharaoh's ability to manage it. Massive irrigation projects, grain stores, a bureaucracy that tracks everything. But empires built on one river are fragile. Around 2200 BC, the climate shifts again. The Nile floods become unpredictable. Famine spreads. The central government loses control. Regional governors seize power. The Old Kingdom collapses into what Egyptologists call the First Intermediate Period. Egypt fractures. The pyramids stand empty. And for the next 150 years, chaos. Around 2055 BC, a Theban prince named Mentuhotep II fights his way to power and reunites Egypt. The Middle Kingdom begins. This era is often called the Classical Age of Egyptian culture. The art becomes more refined, the literature more sophisticated. The story of Sinuhe, written during this period, is one of the great works of world literature, a tale of exile, longing, and homecoming that still resonates 4,000 years later. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom are different from the god-kings of the Old Kingdom. They present themselves as shepherds of the people, protectors of the weak. Their statues show worried faces, furrowed brows, a deliberate contrast to the serene, untouchable expressions of earlier rulers. Egypt expands south into Nubia, building massive fortresses along the Nile to control trade in gold, ivory, and ebony. They dig a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, an ancient Suez Canal, thousands of years before the modern one. But prosperity attracts attention. People from the Levant, the area around modern Syria and Palestine, have been migrating into the Nile Delta for generations. The Egyptians call them Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands. At first they're traders, workers, settlers. Then, as the central government weakens, they take control of the delta. By around 1650 BC, the Hyksos rule Lower Egypt from their capital at Avaris. They bring new technology, horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, bronze weapons. Egypt has never seen anything like it. The Theban rulers in the south refuse to accept foreign rule. A brutal war of liberation begins. It takes 3 generations. Pharaoh Seqenenre-Tao dies in battle. His mummy shows catastrophic head wounds. His sons carry on the fight. Finally, Ahmose. He drives the Hyksos out of Egypt entirely. And what comes next will be the most powerful civilization the ancient world has ever seen. The New Kingdom. 1550 to 1070 BC. This is the Egypt you see in the films. The pharaohs learn a lesson from the Hyksos invasion. The best defense is offense. They build an empire. Egyptian armies march into Syria, push south deep into Nubia. At its peak, Egypt controls territory from the fourth cataract of the Nile to the Euphrates River. The wealth pouring in is staggering. Gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Thebes becomes the richest city on earth. The temple complex at Karnak expands for centuries, every pharaoh adding another hall, another pylon, another row of sphinxes. It covers 200 acres. The hypostyle hall alone has 134 columns, each one 20 meters tall, so wide that 100 people could stand on top of a single one. Then there's Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh in her own right. She seizes power around 1478 BC, rules for 20 years, and presides over an era of extraordinary prosperity. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is a masterpiece, carved into the cliff face, elegant, modern-looking even now. After her death, someone tries to erase her from history, chiseling her name off monuments. It doesn't work. We remember her perfectly well. Her stepson, Thutmose III, becomes Egypt's greatest military commander. 17 campaigns in 20 years. The Battle of Megiddo, where he outflanks a coalition of Canaanite kings, is one of the first battles in recorded history described in tactical detail. Then comes the strangest pharaoh of all, Akhenaten, Around 1353 BC, he decides that Egypt's traditional gods are wrong. There is only one god, the Aten, the sun disk. He closes the temples, moves the capital to a brand new city in the desert called Akhetaten, modern Amarna. He changes the art style to something almost surreal: elongated faces, swollen bellies, exaggerated curves. Egyptologists still argue about what he was actually trying to do. His queen is Nefertiti, whose painted bust is one of the most famous works of art ever created, and their probable son inherits the throne at about 9 years old. His name is Tutankhamun. He reverses his father's religious revolution, restores the old gods, and dies at 18 or 19. He'd be a historical footnote except for one thing: his tomb survives intact until 1922, when Howard Carter opens it and finds the most spectacular burial treasure ever discovered: a solid gold death mask weighing 11 kilograms. After the Amarna period, Egypt needs a strong hand. It gets Ramesses II. He rules for 66 years, the second longest reign in Egyptian history. He builds Abu Simbel, 4 colossal statues of himself carved into a cliff face, each one 20 meters tall. He fights the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, the largest chariot battle in history, and though neither side wins, he carves victory inscriptions everywhere. Ramesses has roughly 100 children. He's so dominant that 9 later pharaohs take his name, but even he can't stop what's coming. Around 1200 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean collapses. The Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders from the Aegean, sweep through, destroying the Hittite Empire, burning cities along the coast. Egypt survives, barely. Ramesses III defeats the Sea Peoples in a desperate naval battle, but the empire is exhausted. The trade networks that sustained it are gone. The new kingdom slowly unravels. Tomb robbing becomes so rampant that the priests secretly move the royal mummies to hidden caches. The country splits again, pharaohs in the north, priests in the south. Egypt's golden age is over, but the story isn't finished, not by 1,000 years. What follows is a millennium of foreign domination, and yet Egyptian culture proves astonishingly resilient. The Libyans take the throne first, then the Nubians, the very people Egypt once conquered, march north and rule as the 25th dynasty. They don't destroy Egyptian culture, they embrace it. They build more pyramids than the Egyptians ever did, small steep ones in what's now Sudan. In 671 BC, the Assyrians invade. The most feared army in the ancient world storms into Egypt and sacks Thebes. The city never fully recovers. But the Assyrian Empire is overstretched, and within a generation they're gone. A brief Egyptian renaissance follows under the 26th dynasty. The Sate pharaohs look back deliberately to the Old Kingdom, copying art styles from 2,000 years earlier. It's nostalgia on a national scale. Then the Persians arrive. In 525 BC, Cambyses II conquers Egypt and makes it a province of the Persian Empire. For the next 2 centuries, Egypt alternates between Persian rule and brief periods of independence. The Egyptians hate the Persians. They revolt constantly. In 332 BC, a new conqueror arrives. He's 24 years old. His name is Alexander. Alexander the Great takes Egypt from the Persians without a fight. The Egyptians welcome him as a liberator. He visits the Oracle of Amun at Siwa, where the priests reportedly declare him the son of the god. He founds a new city on the Mediterranean coast. He calls it Alexandria. Then he leaves. He'll never come back. He dies in Babylon 9 years later. His generals carve up his empire. Egypt falls to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions. The Ptolemaic dynasty rules Egypt for nearly 300 years. They're Greek-speaking Macedonians, but they play the pharaoh game perfectly, building temples in traditional Egyptian style, adopting the old religious ceremonies, presenting themselves as the legitimate successors of 3,000 years of pharaohs. Alexandria becomes the intellectual capital of the ancient world. The Great Library holds perhaps 400,000 scrolls, the largest collection of knowledge in existence. The Lighthouse of Pharaohs is one of the 7 wonders. Euclid writes his geometry here. Eratosthenes calculates the circumference of the Earth and gets it nearly right. But the real power in the Mediterranean is shifting west. Rome is rising, and Rome is hungry. The last pharaoh is arguably the most famous. Cleopatra VII takes the throne in 51 BC. She's not Egyptian by blood, she's Macedonian Greek, descended from Ptolemy. But she's the first of her dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language. She speaks 9 languages in total. She's brilliant, politically ruthless, and she understands that Egypt's survival depends on managing Rome. She allies herself with Julius Caesar. When he arrives in Alexandria, she supposedly has herself smuggled into his presence rolled in a carpet. They become lovers. She gives him a son. Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC. Cleopatra shifts her alliance to Mark Antony, one of the 3 men now fighting for control of Rome. They fall in love, or at least they form one of the most consequential political partnerships in history. Together, they try to build an Eastern empire powerful enough to rival Rome. It doesn't work. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and Antony's rival, declares war. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet is destroyed. They flee back to Egypt. The following year, Octavian's armies reach Alexandria. Antony kills himself with his own sword. Cleopatra, according to ancient sources, dies from the bite of an asp, a cobra, though the true method remains uncertain. She's 39 years old. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ends. Egypt becomes a province of Rome. 3,000 years of pharaohs, 3,000 years of independence, finished. Octavian becomes Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He's so concerned about Egypt's strategic importance, it's Rome's breadbasket, supplying 1/3 of the city's grain, that he makes it his personal province. No Roman senator is allowed to visit without his permission. The temples keep functioning for a while. The last known hieroglyphic inscription is carved in 394 AD at the Temple of Philae. After that, the knowledge of how to read them is lost. For 1,400 years, the writing of the pharaohs is silent, until a soldier in Napoleon's army finds a broken stone near the town of Rosetta. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, carries the same text in 3 scripts: hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Greek. In 1822, Jean-François Champollion cracks the code. Suddenly, after centuries of silence, the pharaohs can speak again. And what they tell us reshapes everything we thought we knew about human civilization. The 365-day calendar. The Egyptians invented it. Medicine, the Edwin Smith Papyrus describes surgical procedures with a sophistication that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. Architecture, obviously. Mathematics. The concept of zero wasn't theirs, but the geometry required to build the pyramids was centuries ahead of everyone else. They invented paper, papyrus, giving us the very word. They invented toothpaste. They were among the first to brew beer. They developed one of the earliest postal systems. Their influence flows through Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, and into the foundations of the modern world. The pyramids still stand. The temples at Luxor and Karnak still draw millions of visitors. Tutankhamun's mask is still the most recognizable face from the ancient world. 5,000 years on, and ancient Egypt refuses to be forgotten. Stand in the Valley of the Kings today, and the sand is the same sand. The sun is the same sun. The river still flows north to the sea, the same way it did when the first farmers planted their crops on its banks. Civilizations rise and fall, empires come and go, but the Nile keeps flowing. And that's the entire history of ancient Egypt. Thanks for watching. Creating videos like this takes an enormous amount of research and work. If you enjoyed it, a like and subscribe genuinely helps this channel grow. And if there's a civilization or city you'd like us to cover next, drop it in the comments.